So we certainly have been covering the crime stories coming out of areas, particularly where we've seen suspects shot down by police. But this also coming into sharp focus now. KwaZulu-Natal police have launched a manhunt for those behind the fatal shooting of 6 people in Umlazi over the weekend. 3 men were reportedly sitting outside their rented accommodation when unknown suspects opened fire last night. The suspects then proceeded to the landlord's house where they shot him and another occupant. A 6th person was gunned down on the pathway. All the victims, aged between 20 and 40, were declared dead at the scene. Meanwhile, in Cape Town, police there are investigating a shooting which left 7 teenagers wounded in Hanover Park. Well, to weigh in on this discussion, let's now bring in Tshwane University of Technology's crime and violence expert, Professor Jacob Mofokeng. Professor Mofokeng, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. 2 big themes that are certainly coming up over the last few weeks, and that is police shootings of suspects and then mass shootings in some of the incidents that we're seeing, like the one in Hanover Park in the Western Cape, and certainly 6 people being shot in Umlazi over the weekend. Can we talk a little bit about what your reaction is? Is this an upsurge, or is there more coverage of these stories in your view?
Well, morning, Naledi, and Newzroom Afrika, the viewers. Well, South Africa is awash with illegal firearms, fueling mass shootings and conflict, and then these firearms, they are in the hands of organized criminal groups, gangsterism, and it is easy to be able to access firearms and ammunitions. Also it becomes a currency for the underworld of gangs, hitmen, drug syndicates, extortion, kidnappings. We see cash in transit, how these people are using high caliber firearms. So this is indication that depending whether these firearms were originally from the legal owners, Gun-Free South Africa, around its survey around 2021, it indicated that there were around 2.7 million of legal owners in South Africa. But, with transition of time, this, legal firearms, they happen now to be get lost and, during, house robberies, burglaries. But we also see that South Africa then has been, where people are so obsessed with, owning firearms, whether in illegal ways or by means of illegal means. We see countries such as, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, that are feeders to South Africa. So we see then these kinds of mass shootings in KwaZulu-Natal, where, now and then, these people will always retaliate whenever they are confronted with the police to be arrested.
Yeah.
The same can be said also in the Western Cape, where we see, kinds of construction mafias as well as gangsterism, where even young children, they're introduced, whereby, whenever the gangsters are shooting amongst themselves, the youngsters will come and pick up these cartridges so that they can get reward for that, so that the police cannot come and process the crime scene. So we have seen this, kinds of, phenomenon really emerging in South Africa, where, it is so easy, to get hold of firearms and ammunition.
Yeah, and I want to sit with the issue of firearm a little bit, because that's quite some data that you've shared with us, right? That by 2021, there were 2.7 million legal gun owners, but that over time, those firearms do, a substantial amount of them do end up in illegal hands. One of the things that Gun-Free South Africa has also asked for, though, is that government really focus on firearm control. But what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, it has been argued that, like the case that you have just mentioned now, where, even police officials in KwaZulu-Natal, they are implicated, where they are making use of state-issued, firearms, whereby there's also in the crime scene, case dockets, whereby those that are within law enforcement agencies, they are able now, as a weakest link, to be able to, collude with criminal networks, whereby, they are able to sell, even issue, bulletproofs as well as other, police uniform to these, people that are within, the communities that are terrorizing. So there are stories that these gangsters, as well as these groups, they can go anywhere, whenever after they make a hit, they can occupy a particular or take over a particular house and demand, that they need to use that particular establishment as a safe house until the situation is cool off. So we see also in South Africa that the division or maybe the conflict between, communities whereby others are saying police are using upper hand, they are trigger happy, whereas other communities, they are indicating that really the police are losing war on crime. But it is because of maybe there is a lesser awareness. But also we see that as early as 2017, the DPCI made submission to the Parliamentary Monitoring Group whereby they made intention that they had to, because of the demands and because of the limited capacity, they need to bring illegal, firearm unit within their establishment. But because of lack of political will, we still struggle in terms of, we are talking about the task teams, within the taxi violence, we still talk about the task team, but whereby we have to re-establish, this particular specialized unit that will be able to look at these issues, across the affected provinces. We still see the parliamentarians, arguing to check whether is there any conviction, arrest versus conviction. So we still see that there's still a problem within decision making at the parliamentary level.
Yeah, and I, you talk about at a parliamentary level, and there's always going to be, of course, the question around whether we have the right people for the job. And there's a debate around, for instance, the police commissioner in KwaZulu-Natal, Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, and his approach of dealing with crime in the province. Some saying that it is heavy-handed. And then there's the question of who leads the ministry as a whole. Senzo Mchunu, is he the man for the job? And if you were in that position, where's the first place you'd start? Particularly where you're seeing mass shootings, 7 teenagers gunned down in Hanover. Those are horrific news.
Well, I'm of the view that the minister is the right man for the job. The approach and whatever that he has been really, indicating since he took over the office. But also his play recently is about, what I mentioned, that we are conflicted as a community or as society in South Africa. We see the police, as if now they are using a strong hand in terms of apprehending these particular criminals. But the issue is then, as I indicated, that South African is really awash with illegal firearms. So we allow this proliferation of firearms, in our communities, and we know if even of our relatives that are in possession of firearms, that are making use of this particular firearms. And when the police are supposed to be doing their job, then we criticize that particular. I think if then we can stand up as communities to work together to be able to, to report of this particular incidents whereby we know of manufacturing or distribution of firearms. We know of certain communities where people cannot even, when there are community meetings, they cannot even say anything because they are afraid of being targeted. So in South Africa, after 3 decades of, democracy, yet we cannot freely indicate that, certain sectors of our communities are still, operating under the, the underworld. So that shows that, even those good police officials that are still there to try to bring difference, we still then be hampered by communities that are paralyzed by fear of reporting. And also, we have to bring the issue of whistleblowing, then protection of such, because we still see professionals being targeted, killed by, hitmen. So these are the dynamics that are facing South African communities.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, we are facing a problem where a lot of the crime in South Africa is well organized. I mean, I think back to the alleged firearm training camp in Modimolle in Limpopo that was discovered, and obviously the police minister having had quite a bit to say about it. But I wonder also what this says to the international community, what it says about, you know, who South Africa is and how we deal with lawlessness in our country.
Yeah, remember the issue of grey listing, it has been, you know, and other, you know, monitoring in terms of whether there is good governance in South Africa. So when international observers look at, you know, the governance as well as the political will in South Africa, as well as the willingness and how free we are as communities to be able to, you know, to bring those that are doing certain illegal activities into account. So it will really determine whether, you know, these particular international communities are willing to join with us. Remember, you know, what has been happening in other sectors of Africa, it is because of international, you know, observers that got tired, you know, fatigue, because they've been investing in those communities to be able to enhance, you know, security services. And we hope that that cannot happen in South Africa because you know, these countries, they will invest in terms of improving intelligence as well as working with crime intelligence. But over time, if South African government, as well as those that are within law enforcement, seem not to be, you know, working and you know, cooperating, so it will really become a challenge.
All right. Well, I wish we could talk more because this is such an important discussion, Prof, but we really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Professor Jacob Mofokeng there, who is the Tshwane University of Technology's crime and violence expert, speaking to us this morning on the AM report. Let's